Welcome back to Gamer in the Wardrobe, where I literally play games, video games, and TCGs in the comfort of my closet. Today we're going to be doing a Set 4 spoiler for Alpha Clash. Set 4 is coming out in November 2024. Really excited for this set. It's going to really kind of change up the meta and what's going on right now. And we're going to be covering the starter deck Pestilence. And I think this is going to be one that you want to watch because he is going to be a menace. All right. First things first, let's go over the contenders. A 25 health contender, Pestilence, Toxic Presence. And what you really want to notice is the word toxic. That's going to be the overall theme, is toxic and discard. At 25 health, once per turn during your primary phase, you may move any number of toxic counters from a permanent you control to a target clash card. So that could be to an opponent target clash card or to one of yours, because some of your cards will get perks from having toxic counters on them. And then in that same 25 health, once per turn, whenever 2 or more toxic counters are put on a clash card you don't control, target player discards 1 card. Guys, your opponent should be discarding a card every turn. Every single turn if you're playing this deck properly and optimal, which is going to be a nuisance. And then after that, once you get to 15, which is a really unique number, because a lot of contenders are 30 health and 10 for their Death Store ability, this is 25 and 15. So you're getting to this ability a lot faster. And it says non-Pestilence clash cards you don't control with 1 or more toxic counters lose all abilities. That's going to be huge because there are some cards coming out in this set that have really, really strong abilities. I mean, even think of like the Warcry Buffalo. You put 1 toxic counter on it, and you're at 15 health, it loses all of its abilities. There's other cards that are coming out where you put a toxic counter on it. It doesn't have breakthrough, it doesn't have flight, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. So that is going to be a nuisance to deal with. I think a key thing to point out is this is a 1 attack, 0 defense contender. The last Pestilence was a 0-1. This is a 1-0. So, you know, you kind of are a glass cannon here. You want to prevent your team or your opponent from attacking. You want to, the way I'm imagining this is you're putting toxic counters on them to discard, and then you're building a board based around building toxic counters and minusing your opponent's attacks so that they just can't do damage to you effectively. And while they can't do damage to you, you're building up toxic counters, having them discard cards, and just starving them to death until you drop some bigger units and swing, right? That said, let's go into the actual new cards that are going to come in that Clash kit. Your 1-drop Pestilence, the Virulent. I don't know if that's how you say it. Virulent. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am. Trigger Enter, put 1 toxic counter on target Clash card. Trigger Defeat, put 1 toxic counter on target Clash card. It's a 0-1 Harbinger card. So this is an easy, 1-drop, drop it in, put a counter, put a toxic counter on opponent card, swing, it dies, put a toxic counter on opponent card. You've put 2 toxic counters on your opponent's card, trigger your contender ability, and they discard a card. It also could make a good blocker in a pinch. It's a low-cost unit that's really in theme with the contender's ability. The new Pestilence Affliction Giver is a 3-drop, 2 green pip Clash card. It's a 3 attack, 3 defense, so pretty decent body for 3. And it has Trigger Defeat. Clash cards you don't control with toxic counters on them get -1/-1 until the end of turn. That's pretty huge. I mean, if you have an opponent that has 5 cards on board, let's say you're playing against Krung, and he has 1 Krung and 4 units, and all of them are getting +1/+1, you could obstruct as a 3/3 if all of them have a toxic counter on them. This dies, probably kills something in the process, and all of those units get -1/-1. It could potentially even kill some smaller units. So really, really good card, good attacker, good defender, and it has an upside with its Trigger Defeat. The 4-drop Warden, I think this is the one that I'm most excited to play with, just because if you think of the current cards that are in green that, maneuver your opponent's cards to trigger, engage, or have to obstruct, creating lanes for this. I'm thinking of Defiler's Vial, which we're going to talk about in a second. I'm thinking about Whistler. which is one where you swing and then they have to swing, and now you have an open lane to swing, right? And this card says, whenever this card deals clash damage to a contender, that contender's controller discards one card. If a clash card is discarded this way, all non-Harbinger clash cards get -2/-2 until the end of turn. Nuts. That's absolutely nuts. Like, even in this combo here, let's say you have the 3-drop Affliction Giver on board, you swing, and there's toxic counters on their clash cards. You swing, it dies, everything gets -1. You tap something or engage something of theirs, so now you have a lane to swing with Pandemic Warden. Now everything already has -1/-1. This now hits their contender. They discard a card, and everything now also gets -2/-2 that's not a Harbinger. So you effectively just did a -3/-3 stat reduction to all of their cards on turn 4, assuming they're not Harbingers. So I think this could be a really strong card, but even the upside with that is they're discarding a card if you hit the contender. 2/4, nice big butt on this guy, which is nice. And then if you pair it with the Clash buff that also discards a card, they could be discarding 2 cards with 1 swing for 5 damage, right? So we're going to talk about a few of those things, but really cool upside. And then some of my favorite art, the Pestilence Harbinger of Desolation is a 5-drop, 2 green pip. It is exclusive, so you can only have 1 on the board at a time. And it says trigger enter. You may put 1 toxic counter on this card. Then, for each permanent you control with the toxic counter, you may put 1 additional toxic counter on that permanent. So this is going to work with, all of your Defiler Vials, your Infectious Presences, anything that's going to have a counter on it, because you do get perks with some of the stuff for having counters on yourself, is going to benefit from this card. It's a 3/4 body, which is a decent sized body, but the next couple of things are what's really going to make this card even better. Pestilence clash cards you control with 1 or more toxic counter get trigger defeat. You may move any number of toxic counters from this card to target permanent. So in theory, let's say you have 1 toxic counter on all of your stuff. This enters the board, you put 1 additional toxic counter on all of your stuff that has a toxic counter on it. Let's say you swing with the 1-drop and the 3-drop, they both die. You can now move all of those toxic counters to any number of toxic counters from this card to target permanent. So you can now put those toxic counters onto the Harbinger of Desolation, because during your primary phase, let's say they both die, they had 3 on one of them and 2 on the other. Now you have 5 on the Harbinger of Desolation, and it says during your primary phase, you may remove 5 toxic counters from this card. If you do, target clash card gets -5/-5 and loses all card effects and abilities until the end of the turn. Going to be some pretty nuts combos. I'm excited to play this deck if you couldn't tell. Here's a couple of pretty staples. I really only highlighted the green Harbinger, green Pestilence package cards because I think that's where this is going to play the most ball. But you could add some splash of blacks with your Spatial Gateways, bringing back your Harbingers. War's going to have some really nice Harbingers. But just for the simplicity of this video, I wanted to kind of stick with the Pestilence package and how I imagine this deck functioning. The key card, in my opinion, the number 1 card you have to have in this deck is the Defiler's Vial. Trigger enter, put 1 toxic counter on the card. Once per turn during your primary phase, you may engage this card. If you do, put 1 toxic counter on this card. Once per turn during your primary phase, you may engage this card and send it to Oblivion. If you do, engage target clash card with an initial resource cost less than or equal to the number of toxic counters on this card. So, before I go over the rest of them, this is how I imagine this working, right? You're playing Pestilence Contender. Turn 1, you resource a green. You play, let's say your opponent goes first, they're playing white. They pay 1 white resource, put out Haven, the 1/2, draw a card. Pass to you. Okay, cool. You're playing Pestilence. Draw your card, resource a green, put out Defiler's Vial. Trigger enter. It gets 1 toxic counter on it. Trigger engage. It now gets 2 toxic counters on it. Now, with the Pestilence ability, I can once per turn, or you may move any number of toxic counters from a permanent you control to target clash card. I'm going to remove those 2 toxic counters that I just got from the Defiler's Vial on turn 1, and I'm going to put it on that Haven. And then I'm going to, whenever 2 or more toxic counters are put onto a clash card you don't control, target player discards it. So I put it on that Haven, they discard 2 cards. or they discard one card. They discard one card. Turn 1, they discard one card. All right. Turn 2 comes back to me. I play a second Defiler's Vial from my hand. So the one that's already on the board has 0 toxic counters. I engage that to get 1 on that. I play the second one from my hand. It gets 1. I engage that to get 2. I now have 3 toxic counters on my side of the board. Okay? I'm going to swing with my Contender because I have Infestation in my hand. So now I'm swinging with my Contender at their Contender for 1. No obstructs, any buffs. I'm going to buff with Infestation. I'm now hitting that Contender for 4, and they are discarding a card. And then on top of that, I'm going to take 2 toxic counters off of my Defiler Vials, put it back on one of their cards, and then they're going to discard another card. So by the end of my second turn, they should have discarded 3 cards with this strategy. And that's not even getting into the other stuff we can do and the fun stuff we can do, which I'm going to kind of explain, I think, in the next slide. There's a couple of strategies I have there as well. But this is going to be a really, really fun way to piss off your opponent, right? So back to this, that's how I've imagined Defiler's Vial working. And then on top of that, eventually it's going to start steamrolling and steamrolling, and you can use that to engage their cards by getting rid of the toxic counters on it, to then hit them with the Pestilence Pandemic Warden, where they would discard a card and get -2/-2 to all non-Harbinger cards. So there's some really cool synergies. Wastelands is really cool. If you're playing the Pestilence package, all of your Pestilence get +1 defense, and then you can once per turn take a Clash card back from the field into your hand. So great for your 1-drop Pestilences down here. You can effectively do -4/-4 for 2 resources. Pestilence Mayhem Maker, you could minus their Contender, draw a card, bring it back, minus something else, draw a card, bring it back. Your Pestilence War Grader, this is mostly, or World Degrader, this is mostly in here, A, for the removal buffs, where it gets +1/+1 in the primary phase, but B, at the start of your turn, you may activate the portal. So if you're wanting to kind of work the portal and use the portal, it's a big card with a 4 defense, a nice big butt, and it gives you some portal control if you want it open or closed on your turn. Plaguebringer, these are not new cards. I'll do another video with the newer cards as we get there, but yeah, Plaguebringer, -3/-3, trigger defeat. If the portal is open, you may put target Clash card with an initial resource cost of 1 or less in your Oblivion on top of your deck. Ultimately, that cycles the Pestilence back into your hand if you want to find it. But it's a nice, big, juicy body, 3/3 with a -3/-3 effect for 4, which is amazing. Fatal Foe, I think, could be interesting, because a lot of this is minusing your opponent's stats, changing their stats. So it enters, and all non-Pestilence cards get -1/-1. You pair that with Defiler's Place. Trigger enter effects, you can do those again, and then -1 attack. You trigger that with Infectious Presence, where it enters and it gets 3 toxic counters. And then at the end of your turn, remove 1 counter, and then once there's none left on it, you throw it away. But while this is on the board, all non-Harbinger Clash cards get -2 attack, -0 defense. And the way this deck is functioning in my brain is you should be able to reallocate toxic counters to make sure this just stays alive. So if they're playing non-Harbinger cards, alpha cards, rogue cards, whatever, this card is going to be nasty, right? You have this on your board with a cup with 2 Defiler Vials, continuing to get like the toxic counters and moving them from one to another, and then moving them to your opponent's Clash cards to discard. Could be pretty epic. And then on top of that, the Dreadful Decimation, which is a trap. If you're playing all Harbingers, this is a really good card to have because it's a -6/-6 trap. And you'll probably get there by turn 3 or turn 4 because you'll have at least 4 dead Harbingers in your Oblivion. Okay? Infestation, an amazing Clash buff. I talked about it. When you swing, you buff your Contender or a Clash card for +3, and then your opponent discards a card. This card is going to be so annoying. Not only can you use it offensively, but you can also use it defensively. So if they have no resources up and a 3/4 and a 3/4 on their board, they go to swing at your Contender, you don't obstruct, you play Infestation, you kill that card, they discard, and then if they want to swing again, the card they're swinging with is going to die if it doesn't have more than 5 defense, right? So really, really good card for this contender, right? We went over this process, which brings me to kind of the next process my brain is thinking if I'm kind of thinking the curve out, right? Turn 1, I play Defiler's Vial, put it, enters for 1 toxic, tap for 2 toxic, put 2 toxic on one of their cards, they discard a card. Turn 2, I play a second Defilers. I tap my first, or I engage my first one, get 1 toxic, get 1 toxic for the Defiler Vial that entered, engage that one, go to 2, so now I have 3 total. I put 2 of those onto one of their cards, they discard a card. I swing with my contender, using Infestation, they discard another card, and I just dealt 4 damage to them. Turn 3, I engage my Defiler's Vial, I engage my Defiler's Vial, each getting an additional toxic counter. I can move the one that I didn't use the additional one from over to them, so they discard another card. And then I play out Defiled Place, which I can either use the trigger enter effect on one of their cards to benefit me, like drawing a card or whatever they have, or I can just put another toxic counter on one of these. But the clash cards, all clash cards get -1 attack, is the effect, which is really going to slow them down from hurting me, right? So at this point, they've probably discarded 3 or 4 cards, they've taken 4 damage, I'm probably getting closer to my 15 health ability, which allows my opponent's clash cards to lose all abilities if they have toxic counters on them. And then turn 4, I'm going to play Infectious Pestilence or Pandemic Warden. If I play Pandemic Warden, I'm going to play it, probably try and tap something or engage something with my Defiler's Vial, trash 1, put a toxic counter, 2 toxic counters on one of their cards, they discard a card. They don't have any obstructors. I swing with Pestilence Pandemic Warden. They discard another card, and then -2/-2 to everything. And they're probably not going to obstruct because Infectious Presence is giving -2/-0. Defiled Place is giving -1/-0. So everything effectively has -3 attack, right? And then all this is happening. You have almost no cards in your hand. On turn 5, I drop the Pestilence Harbinger of Desolation, giving all of my permanents an additional toxic counter, and all of my clash cards that have toxic counters, trigger defeat, you may move any number of toxic counters from this card to a permanent. And then maybe I swing with the Pandemic Warden. If they don't obstruct, they discard. If they do, cool, I swing with the 3/4, and then -5/-5 to whatever, because I'm moving 5 toxic counters to this card to kill something. So I'm pretty excited about the potential of what this card can do. And this is just in the starter deck with sets 1 through 3 that we know of. So all the additional cards that are going to come out in this set to benefit Pestilence, I think, are only going to make a mono green Pestilence that much stronger. But these are kind of my quick takes, my hot takes, my hot cakes. I'm going to start calling this hot cakes of what I think for the new starter deck. So that's the Pestilence Starter Deck 4 Clash Kit. And what are your thoughts? And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And I really, really appreciate you guys watching the video. And I will catch you next time. Thank you.